Hello everyone. I'm the storyteller and I'm here to help you relax tonight. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you watching from and what time is it for you right now? Now get comfortable. Take a deep breath. Let yourself unwind. I still remember the first time I heard those footsteps. Heavy, slow, echoing down an otherwise silent hallway. Even before I heard them clearly, something just felt wrong. I had rented a small office in an old commercial building, hoping to focus on my personal projects without distractions. It was quiet and cheap, which seemed perfect at the time. But the moment I stepped inside, something felt off. Outside, a single flickering light lit up the empty parking lot. Inside, the air smelled stale, like cleaning chemicals and dust, and the silence felt too thick. I brushed it off, telling myself I was just nervous about being in a new place, that it would feel normal once I settled in. But normal never came. My office was at the very end of the top floor, a small, isolated room with one long window that overlooked a narrow street. During the day, sunlight barely reached the floor. At night, that window showed nothing but pitch black darkness. It felt like the world outside simply vanished after sunset. That quiet, suffocating feeling grew stronger the longer I stayed. On my first night working late, I was both excited and a little anxious. After 9 p.m., the hallway outside looked more like a tunnel. It was dim and endless. Then I heard it, a soft sound. Maybe someone walking? I checked the time, 9 p.m. The other tenants had all gone home. The cleaning crew didn't arrive until early morning. I was alone, or at least, I was supposed to be. I tried to tell myself it was just the old building making noises. Maybe the air vents or old pipes. That kind of thing can sound like footsteps. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But by the end of the first week, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The footsteps came every night, always around the same time. And they sounded real, like heavy shoes walking slowly, deliberately. Each step echoed through the hallway, getting louder as they approached my door. I'd sit frozen at my desk, heart pounding, palms sweaty, waiting for them to pass by. And every time, they did pass, right outside my door. Then, silence. I never saw anyone. But every night, I was too scared to open the door. One evening, after a stressful day full of missed deadlines and cold drafts that wouldn't go away, I finally had enough. At 8:57 p.m., I stood up, hand hovering over the doorknob. I told myself, if someone's out there, I'll see them. I just needed to be brave. Then I heard the steps, faint at first, then louder, closer. My breath quickened. Sweat dripped down my forehead. My legs felt like they might collapse. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I twisted the knob and flung the door open. Darkness. The hallway lights were off, except for a faint green glow from the emergency exit sign far down the corridor. It felt like I was staring into a void, pure blackness that swallowed everything. I blinked, hoping my eyes would adjust. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anyone. Not a single thing. What I saw wasn't a person, just the outline of something that resembled a human shape. But the footsteps kept going. They sounded so close, it felt like someone brushed right past me. My heart was pounding. My head throbbed with pressure. My mouth went dry. I wanted to scream or run, but I couldn't. I just stood there, frozen like a statue carved out of fear, staring into the dark. Then, just as suddenly, the footsteps faded, like they turned a corner that didn't even exist. And I was left in silence. I must have stood there with the door wide open for a full minute before I could move again. When I finally closed it, my hands were trembling. I couldn't focus on anything for the rest of the night. I kept replaying the moment over and over in my head. There was no figure, no shadow, no flicker of movement, but the sound was real as my own heartbeat thundering in my chest. I tried to be logical. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the stress was getting to me. Maybe the brain hears what it fears the most. But deep down, I didn't believe that. It felt real. The following week, I tried to bring it up casually. I asked the landlord if anyone else worked late on my floor. He shook his head and said, "Nope, you're the only one who renewed a lease in that wing. Budgets are tight. Nobody else wanted it." Then he smiled and said, "You must really enjoy your solitude." I forced a smile back. I mentioned hearing some noises at night, but he just shrugged. Old buildings make weird sounds. If anything serious happens, just call my emergency number. That conversation didn't help. If even the landlord had no explanation, then I really was alone. But night after night the same thing happened. Around 9 p.m. the footsteps returned. Always the same heavy, steady rhythm. My body reacted the same way every time, heart racing, breath shaky, sweat on my forehead. I tried blasting music through headphones to block out the sound. It didn't help. The footsteps still echoed, like the whole hallway was a giant drum. I tried something else, leaving the door open at 8:45 p.m., lights on bright, determined to see something if it appeared. But even then the footsteps came. Loud, clear, walking past my door. And yet, no one was ever there. It felt like an invisible presence was pacing back and forth, right in front of me. Over time, my office began to feel suffocating. The overhead light would flicker now and then, casting strange, warped shadows. The radiator hissed at random, releasing hot air that smelled old and dusty. The room felt cold, but I'd be sweating. Sometimes I caught my own reflection in the dark window, blurry, distorted. Once or twice I thought I saw the shape of someone standing behind me. But whenever I turned around, the room was empty. The fear started to eat away at me. Was I losing my mind? Were these hallucinations? Was stress warping my senses? I tried to explain it all away. Maybe it was just weird acoustics or my imagination. But that explanation shattered the night I felt the vibration. After hearing the footsteps again, I crouched near the door and pressed my hand to the floor. And I felt it. Each step sent a faint tremor into my palm. Real. Physical. It wasn't in my head. I pulled my hand back, heart lodged in my throat. No hallucination could make the floor shake. That moment changed everything. From then on, I dreaded the evenings. Even during the day, I jumped at random sounds, a creaking door, a car horn outside, the hum of the building's old vents. I was constantly tense. My jaw ached from clenching it so much. Headaches became normal. When people asked about the new office, I kept it vague. I'd say things like, "It's kind of creepy," or "It's a little unsettling." But I never told anyone the full truth. I was afraid they'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe. I was starting to think that myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe I was just losing it. But eventually, my work started to suffer so badly that I knew I had to face whatever was in that hallway. One Thursday night, I gathered my courage and made a plan. I arrived just before sunset, set up a camera to record both video and audio, and turned on every single light in the hallway. If this was something explainable, a person sneaking in or some faulty system, I was going to catch it. That evening, the building felt even more sinister than usual. Even the elevator ride up felt wrong. The flickering bulb overhead cast strange shadows, and every little shake made my heart race. Once I reached my floor, I placed the camera in front of my office door and aimed it down the entire length of the corridor. Then I went back inside and tried to steady my breathing. When the clock neared 9 p.m., I stood by the door, ready to jump out the moment I heard something. And then, right on time, the footsteps started. That same distant, deliberate rhythm echoed down the hallway. My heart pounded. My throat tightened. My body tensed. But this time I forced myself to act. I flung the door open while the footsteps were still echoing through the air. The hallway was completely empty. But the sound, those footsteps, kept going. They were right there, just a few feet away. It was as if something invisible was walking past me, completely unfazed by logic or light. My whole body went numb with fear. I reached out into the air, my hand shaking, and felt nothing. Just cold, empty air. And then, without warning, the footsteps stopped. I stood there, breathless, drenched in sweat, surrounded by silence. After a few minutes, when I could finally think straight, I reviewed the camera footage. At the exact moment I heard the footsteps, the hallway lights flickered. The audio clearly picked up the sounds, sharp, unmistakable footsteps. But on video, nothing. No figure. No shadow. No movement at all. Just me opening the door to empty space. That moment broke something inside me. It was the final proof that something was terribly wrong in that building. Something I couldn't explain. Something I couldn't ignore anymore. I realized then I had to leave. The constant feeling of being watched, the crushing weight of dread in the halls, and now this disturbing evidence. None of it was worth the cheap rent or the quiet. I returned one last time in broad daylight to pack up my things. Even then, the building felt cold and hostile. Every creak of the floor sounded like a warning. My chest was tight and sweat soaked my collar. By the time I carried my last box to the car, I was shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. I never found out what caused those footsteps. I never demanded answers from the landlord. I had a feeling it wouldn't matter. Some things just can't be explained. I left that place behind, but not without scars. My work was in ruins, and my nights were haunted by the memory of those footsteps. Even now, whenever I walk past an empty hallway, I feel my pulse quicken. Some small part of me braces for that same sound, that slow, steady tread. I can't shake the feeling that whatever haunted that corridor wasn't just a trick of the building or my mind. It was something real, something I'll never truly understand. In the end, I ran from whatever walked those halls at night. But a part of me is still there, listening, waiting, dreading. And that thought sends a chill through me that no sunlight can ever fully chase away. From the very first moment I stepped into that building, something felt off. The air was stale, like it hadn't moved in years. Darkness clung to the corners of the rooms, and even in daylight, the place felt dim. It made my skin crawl. But I told myself it was just an old building. Old places have their quirks, right? I had plans to open a small antique shop, and the property seemed perfect, especially the spacious basement, which offered all the storage I could ever need for my growing collection of oddities. What I didn't realize was that the shadows in that building had a life of their own. They didn't just linger, they watched. They fed on doubt, and over time they chipped away at my sanity. I remember the day I signed the lease. The landlord, a gray-haired man with a lined face, didn't smile once. He talked about the building's poor wiring and how few people had stayed in it over the years. I asked why no one stayed long. He didn't answer directly. He just mumbled something about the place having its quirks. I figured he meant the usual stuff: bad plumbing, flickering lights, maybe a bug problem. Nothing unusual for an older property. He never said anything else, and I didn't press him. But now I wonder if he knew more than he let on. Still, there was something in his expression, almost like relief, as he handed me the keys. It was as if he was passing on a heavy burden. The first few days in the building were surprisingly pleasant. I spent my time setting up the shop, carefully arranging shelves and glass display cases with the antique trinkets and curios I had collected over the years. The creaking floorboards became a familiar background sound, and the occasional flicker of the lights simply reminded me to schedule an electrician. Each evening, I carried boxes down to the basement. It was dimly lit by a single, bare bulb. The stone walls were always cold to the touch, and there were no windows, just thick concrete and a chill that settled deep in my bones if I stayed too long. Still, at first, I felt safe down there. Secure, even. That changed the night I stayed late to grab a ledger I had forgotten. I had been working long past closing, and by the time I remembered the missing document, I was exhausted. I grabbed my flashlight and went downstairs. Halfway down the steps, I froze. I heard something, soft, muffled voices like two people whispering to each other just around the corner. I shouldn't have heard anyone else at that hour. The realization sent a jolt of cold fear through me. My hand shook around the flashlight as my heart pounded so loudly it felt like it echoed through the stairwell. I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was just the old plumbing or sound traveling in from the street through a crack in the foundation. That seemed plausible, at least enough to stop me from running back upstairs. But the murmurs continued, stopping and starting like a real conversation. They sounded human. I slowly moved through the basement, checking behind shelves and boxes, my flashlight sweeping every shadow. There was nothing. No footprints, no open doors, no sign that anyone had been there. The voices had stopped, or maybe they were never there at all. I almost laughed at how spooked I felt. Over the next few days, I tried to put the experience behind me. I stayed busy, focused on the store and its growing inventory. But each night, the memory returned, vivid, unsettling, and far too real to simply brush off. Still, for nearly a week, the basement remained quiet. I went down several times to sort boxes or retrieve items, and all I heard were the usual sounds: the creaking floor above, the faint hum of traffic outside. It lulled me into a false sense of security, until it happened again. One evening, around the same late hour, I heard those whispers again. That same low, unintelligible conversation with strange pauses and faint inflections. My throat went dry and I felt my whole body tense. Even though anxiety was washing over me, I forced myself to check. I turned on the overhead light. It flickered weakly but eventually lit the center of the basement. I swept my flashlight across the shelves and crates. Nothing but dust. But the voices kept going for a few more seconds before cutting off completely, right after I called out, asking if someone was there. Silence swallowed the room as if the air itself had stopped moving. It was a silence so complete, so unnatural, it felt like the walls were holding their breath. My hands trembled. Sweat gathered along my hairline. What disturbed me the most was how the voices seemed to be getting clearer each time they came back. Their tone, their rhythm, it all started to sound more distinct, more present. and yet I could never make out the actual words. Whenever I tried to focus, the voices would dissolve into a sort of meaningless static, just out of reach. I started to question my sanity. Was I just exhausted? Stressed? Imagining it all? But my body's reactions told me otherwise. My racing heart, the tightness in my chest, my shallow breathing. This wasn't just in my head. The fear was real. Soon I became paranoid. I jumped at every creak, every groan of the building, every flickering light. Even a stray cobweb brushing against my skin made me flinch. During the day, I moved through the store like I was half asleep, barely present. A few customers asked if I was okay, and I just muttered something about being tired. But when dusk came, that's when the dread returned. A deep sense of unease settled over me, as if the darkness outside was a warning, a signal that something was stirring beneath my feet. One night, I decided to try recording the sounds. I brought a small voice recorder with me and stood in the basement, nearly hyperventilating from the tension. The air felt heavier than ever, colder too. My breath came in short, shaky bursts, and a tremble spread through my limbs. At first, nothing happened. No whispers. Just the sound of my own nervous breathing and the low hum of silence. But after a few minutes, that strange, low murmuring returned. The same eerie voices, like a hushed conversation happening just out of sight. I struggled to stay calm, bracing myself against a wooden shelf. It felt like invisible eyes were staring at me from every direction, and the room began to feel smaller, like the walls were closing in. Eventually, I ran back upstairs, clutching the recorder. I was sure I'd finally captured proof. But when I played it back, nothing. No voices. Just my ragged breathing and a faint, wind-like static. That failure shook me to my core. Was I imagining everything? Had the building's creepy atmosphere pushed me to the edge? I considered getting professional help, or just leaving altogether. But the store had finally started making a bit of money. And strangely, I couldn't let it go. Something about the mystery pulled me in, terrified me, yes, but fascinated me even more. One particularly stifling night, I decided to stay in the basement as long as I could, determined to face whatever was down there. I brought a chair, a camping lantern, and a thermos of coffee. If it came to it, I'd stay until morning. At first, everything was still, dead silent. The only sounds were my own heartbeat and the occasional drip of water against the cold stone walls. Time dragged on. My eyes grew heavy, but my body stayed tense. Every nerve in me screamed to get out. Sweat gathered at my temples. My muscles were tight. I kept scanning the shadows for any movement. Then the whispering started again. Soft, persistent, impossible to understand. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my flashlight. I focused, trying to make out the voices. Were they male? Female? I couldn't tell. They didn't sound quite like either. More like two distant murmurs blending together in a strange, unsettling harmony. I wanted to yell, demand they show themselves, but no words came. I just sat there, frozen between fear and fascination, waiting. That's when I saw it. Something moving in the far corner of the room, just beyond the edge of the lantern's light. It wasn't a figure exactly, more like a shift in the darkness itself, a subtle ripple in the shadows that made my skin crawl. My heart slammed against my chest, and dark spots danced at the edges of my vision. I leaned forward, trying to get a better look, but whatever it was faded back into the dark. The voices continued, still murmuring as if trying to lure me in. The pressure in the room grew heavier. I felt like something invisible was pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. In a sudden burst of courage, I stood up and pointed my flashlight at the corner. I stepped forward, even though every part of me screamed to run. The air was thick, like wading through syrup. My breath came in shallow gasps. I felt lightheaded. The whispers grew louder, not in volume but in urgency. They spun around me like a storm of sound. Then I felt a pressure in my ears, like when a plane descends quickly, followed by a sharp pop. And then, nothing. Total silence. No whispers. No movement. Not even the sound of my own breath. Just a crushing, unnatural stillness that made my ears ring. I couldn't take it anymore. My legs felt like they might give out. I turned and bolted up the stairs, stumbling near the top in my panic. My heart thundered in my chest, and sweat soaked the back of my shirt. Once upstairs, I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, leaning against it as if that would somehow keep whatever was down there from following me. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt something behind me, something whispering nonsense into my ear. I woke up again and again, drenched in cold sweat, haunted by the image of that shifting shadow in the basement. The next morning, I made a decision. I wouldn't let whatever was in that basement keep me prisoner to fear. Instead, I started digging into the building's past. I searched through old files at the local archives, hoping for answers. But all I found were scattered references, minor renovations, a list of past businesses, none of which lasted more than a couple of years. No mention of anything unusual. Still, one detail stood out. People had left suddenly, often without warning or explanation. On what would become my final night in that building, I began packing up my most valuable antiques. I told myself it was just a precaution, something temporary until I figured out a permanent solution. As I moved through the quiet store, the faint hum of the city outside felt strangely far away. My nerves were shot. Every sound felt amplified, every shadow stretched just a bit too long. The overhead lights flickered, my throat was painfully dry, and every swallow felt like sandpaper. As I carried my last load up the basement stairs, I heard them again, those faint, whispering voices drifting up behind me. Soft, steady, relentless. I froze, heart pounding, my face flushing with fear. And in that moment, I finally understood. The whispers would never stop. They weren't something passing through, they were part of the building, woven into its very walls. Some ancient, unresolved presence that lingered deep beneath the surface. Unable to bear it another second, I locked the basement door one last time. Before I left, I turned back and shone my flashlight down the stairs. The beam lit only part of the basement, leaving most of it swallowed in darkness. The air shifted as if something down there sensed I was leaving. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and my heartbeat thundered in my ears. Without looking back again, I shut the door and turned the key. To this day, I still don't know what was down there, or what it wanted. Even now, when I think about those nights and the strange, indecipherable whispers, my stomach tightens and my palms go clammy. Sometimes I try to convince myself it was just stress or my imagination getting the best of me. But deep down, I know better. Something was in that basement. Something that didn't belong to the world I know. Something that watched and waited. I moved out soon after. I found a new location across town and reopened my antiques business. The place was bright, newly renovated, and filled with the scent of fresh paint. But still, even now, I hesitate every time I reach for a basement door. Some part of me is always listening, waiting for that low, familiar murmur to return. It never has. Yet the memory of those voices lingers, like a stain I can't wash away. A quiet reminder that some echoes never fade, no matter how far you run. I felt it before I even saw the corridor. Not a sound or a sight, but a cold. A deep, crawling chill that sank beneath my skin and settled in my bones. It was too sharp, too sudden to blame on a summer breeze or a drafty window. The first time I stepped into that narrow hallway, my breath caught in my throat. A heavy, inexplicable unease washed over me. The rest of the house was lit with soft sunlight, but that corridor? It felt still, stagnant, as if the air itself was holding its breath. Something was wrong with it, though I couldn't say what. It felt like I was being watched, like something unseen was waiting in silence. The house had been left to me by a distant relative I barely remembered. At first, I thought it would make for a peaceful escape from the chaos of city life. The place sat on a large stretch of land, surrounded by tall grass and thick clusters of trees. Its exterior paint had faded to a lifeless gray, and the shutters clattered in the wind, adding an eerie rhythm to the quiet. I remember standing in the gravel driveway, staring up at the house, wondering if I had the time or energy to bring it back to life. Inside, the rooms were filled with dusty furniture draped in sheets. The fireplace was caked in old soot, and antique knickknacks were piled in corners like forgotten memories. That first weekend, I spent most of my time cleaning, sorting through what I wanted to keep. The house had a strange smell, earthy like damp wood, and something faintly sweet that I couldn't quite identify. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. A reminder that this had been someone else's home before mine. But it wasn't the furniture or the scent that unsettled me. It was that corridor. It ran between the kitchen and a small guest room, unremarkable on paper but somehow deeply wrong in person. It felt like it didn't belong, like the house had tried to forget it was there. The corridor was only about 10 feet long with no windows and lit by a single weak light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Even though the rest of the house was warm, or even stuffy, that narrow hallway always felt like it belonged to another world. It was freezing cold, suffocating, and carried an invisible weight that made my skin crawl. The first time I walked through it, I shrugged off the discomfort, assuming I was just tired. But every time I crossed it after that, I felt the same biting chill, and worse, it often felt like something lightly brushed the back of my neck. I tried to come up with logical explanations. Maybe there was an old air vent behind the wall or some kind of hidden draft. I checked for leaks, faulty wiring, mold, anything that might explain the sudden drop in temperature. But everything looked fine. The plaster was smooth, the floorboards were solid, and there weren't any visible vents or pipes. Still, that corridor felt wrong. Every time I walked through it, I had the eerie sense that something was watching me. On my second weekend in the house, I decided to stay the night to see if the cold changed at different times. That's when I heard the whispers. I was lying in bed, lights off, trying to fall asleep. The usual sounds of the house, the creaking beams, the soft rustle of leaves outside, were oddly comforting. But then I heard it, a quiet, muffled conversation like several voices whispering just behind a door. My eyes flew open. I held my breath and listened carefully. The sound was coming from the corridor. I got out of bed, trembling from fear and the sudden chill in the air. My stomach clenched and my hands felt numb. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I crept toward the hallway. I flipped the switch. The dim bulb flickered to life. The moment the light filled the corridor, the whispering stopped. Silence returned, thick, heavy, unnatural. But the cold stayed, wrapping around me like wet fabric. I couldn't bring myself to go any farther. I turned around and hurried back to my room, trying to convince myself I was just imagining things. But the longer I stayed in that house, the more I doubted my own reasoning. The tension in that corridor was too real to ignore. It wasn't paranoia, it was something tangible. One afternoon, while carrying cleaning supplies, I walked through the corridor and felt something lightly graze my elbow. My heart raced. I dropped the bag of rags and spun around, nearly losing my balance. No one was there. No movement. Nothing. But the sensation that someone had just been right behind me lingered. My instincts told me to leave. No one was forcing me to stay. And yet I couldn't walk away. Some part of me had to know what was happening. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was stubbornness. Either way, I wasn't ready to give up. After another night filled with whispers, I decided to investigate properly. I grabbed a flashlight and notebook and told myself that if I could just find evidence, any evidence, I could make sense of this. I moved slowly through the corridor, checking every inch of the walls. I tapped on panels, listening for hollow spots. Every knock came back solid. No hidden rooms, no secret compartments. I even tested the temperature. Using an old thermometer I found in a drawer, I checked the kitchen, then the corridor, then the guest bedroom. The drop in temperature inside that small hallway was shocking. Nearly 15 degrees colder than the rooms on either side. There was no normal explanation for that. The experience was taking a physical toll on me. My chest felt tight. My forehead was damp with sweat, even though the air was freezing. My breathing grew shallow every time I stepped into that space. I felt like the house was shrinking, like the walls were slowly closing in, trying to trap me in that narrow corridor. One day, an acquaintance visited the property. I didn't tell them everything, but I casually mentioned that one hallway seemed unusually cold. They laughed and asked if I'd installed a secret air conditioner. If only it were that simple. I remember forcing a smile and trying to laugh off the question. I hinted that it was probably just a draft, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't stop thinking about the thermometer reading and those whispered voices. When we walked through the corridor together, I noticed how quickly my friend sped up his pace. He didn't say anything, but his expression darkened, and he avoided eye contact as soon as we got to the other side. As he left, he made a half-hearted joke that I should get the hallway checked out. It was clear to me he had felt something too. Nights in that house became exhausting. Trying to sleep while waiting for the whispers was somehow worse than actually hearing them. Every creak of the house, every groan of the old wood, set my nerves on edge and played tricks on my mind. One night, I thought I heard soft scratching sounds along the hallway walls. I shot upright in bed, heart pounding in my chest. I stood by the bedroom door, hand trembling on the doorknob, debating whether I should open it. The darkness on the other side felt alive, thick with malice. I imagined pale hands reaching out from the shadows, waiting to pull me in. Every hair on my body stood up. Eventually, I forced myself to open the door. The hallway light was off. The bulb, which had been working just hours earlier, had shattered on the floor. Tiny shards of glass sparkled in the faint ambient light. The corridor loomed ahead like a yawning black hole. My stomach twisted and a wave of nausea hit me. I quickly backed away and stayed up the rest of the night, unable to shake the fear. My mouth felt dry like I'd swallowed dust. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was probably just an electrical issue or a power surge that broke the bulb. But deep down I felt something else, something darker. It was as if the house was warning me, punishing me for trying to uncover its secrets. Over the next few days, the unease only grew. The cold corridor never let me forget it was there. I began seeing strange shadows just at the edge of my vision, always near that hallway. Dark shapes would move across the floor, vanishing the moment I turned to look. My anxiety spiked. My hands constantly trembled. My muscles stayed so tense that they ached. When I did sleep, I dreamed of faceless figures gliding through the corridor, whispering in urgent, hushed tones. Their presence haunted both my dreams and my waking hours. Finally, I decided I'd had enough. I told myself that if I faced this thing directly, maybe I could break its hold over me. Armed with a fresh light bulb, I approached the corridor again. The cold hit me like a wave, sharp and biting, stinging my skin. My fingers shook so badly I could barely screw in the bulb. But once I managed, I flipped the switch, flooding the hallway with dim light. I stepped into the center. The chill wrapped around me completely. Each breath felt heavy, like it was being dragged out of me. My chest tightened, as though invisible hands were pressing down on my ribs. I forced myself to speak out loud, challenging whatever was there. My voice trembled with fear, but I kept talking, letting my words echo off the walls. The air grew heavier, pressing in from all sides. My vision blurred, and a wave of dizziness hit me hard. I stumbled backward into the kitchen. I stood there, gasping for air. My heart was racing so loud, it thundered in my ears. The kitchen felt warmer, almost normal, but I was drenched in cold sweat. Still, I sensed something had shifted. It was like I had pierced through a barrier, and whatever was on the other side had pulled back, if only for a moment. That night, the whispers didn't come. An eerie silence hung in the air, even more oppressive than before. Despite my fear, I felt a small flicker of victory. As if I'd shaken something loose, interrupted its grip on me. But the feeling didn't last. The atmosphere remained charged, like static in the air, a quiet warning that I hadn't defeated anything. I had only stirred it. My thoughts churned with conflict. Part of me wanted to run and never look back. But another part wanted answers. I needed to know what was behind it all. The next morning, I found the corridor colder than ever. A thin layer of condensation coated the walls. My breath formed clouds in the air. When I touched the wall, my fingers recoiled instantly from the bitter cold. It felt unnatural, like touching the inside of a freezer. My mind raced, grasping for any kind of explanation. Maybe something supernatural had taken root there. All the signs, the voices, the touches, the shattered bulb, they all led to the same terrifying realization. Something was truly there. I wasn't just imagining it. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself otherwise, I realized the corridor had taken root in my mind. Its presence infected my thoughts. I didn't feel safe in any corner of the house anymore. I was always aware of the cold, as if it were waiting for me. Every creak, every soft rustle became a warning. My mouth stayed dry. My muscles carried a constant tremor. Paranoia wormed its way into my thoughts, whispering that I'd never be free of this invisible threat. By the end of that day, I knew I needed distance. My heart pounded with a strange mix of relief and dread as I packed my things. But before I left, I forced myself to cross the corridor one last time. The cold hit me like a slap, sharp, unforgiving. My skin tightened against it, a final warning from whatever lingered there. My pulse throbbed in my throat. My breath came in shallow, uneven gasps. I felt something behind me, closer than ever, almost breathing down my neck. The light above flickered, casting long shadows across the narrow walls. They seemed to reach for me. I fought the urge to look back and forced myself to keep walking. At the far end, I stopped and turned to glance behind me. The flickering had stopped. The hallway was still. Just a normal hallway in a normal house, except for the unbearable cold that clung to the air. For a moment, a strange sense of closure settled over me, but it came with a heavy dread. Legally, the house was mine, but I knew in my gut I'd never truly own it. Something else had claimed that space, something beyond logic, beyond understanding. I locked the front door behind me, got in my car, and felt my heartbeat slowly ease as I drove away. Dust rose behind me on the quiet country road, but the memory of that cold never left. Even as I reached the soft glow of the city lights, a weight remained on my chest. I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid, that the house was only wood and stone. But I knew better. The chill, the whispers, the presence, they were all real. My hands were still clammy on the steering wheel. My breath caught in my throat as if a part of me had never left, as if I was still standing there in the dark. In the weeks that followed, I never found a logical explanation. I debated selling the house, or just leaving it empty, an unwanted relic from a legacy I never asked for. Late at night, when the sound of traffic outside my apartment lulled me toward sleep, I'd think about that corridor. I'd picture it growing colder with each passing hour. Sometimes I'd see flickering shadows at the edge of my vision. Sometimes I'd feel that familiar presence again, like something was watching. The connection hadn't severed. It had followed me. Now, I understand something I couldn't admit before. That hallway might look empty, but it's not. Something lives there. It thrives on fear, feeds on attention, and waits in silence. And though I escaped that house physically, the corridor follows me still. It lingers in my thoughts, a chilling reminder that the most terrifying horrors aren't the ones we can explain. They're the ones that stay with us. Quiet, patient, waiting for us to come back. I still remember my first night in that place. The air felt heavy, almost stale. Every sound echoed strangely in the long hallway leading to my new bedroom. Even before I stepped inside, something about the ground floor apartment from the 1950s felt off. My skin prickled the moment I closed the door, like I'd entered a space where I wasn't entirely welcome. I brushed it off, figured it was just nerves from moving into a new place. But the discomfort only grew stronger with time. As I moved my boxes into the main bedroom, I noticed the only piece of furniture the previous tenant had left behind. An antique mirror leaning against the wall. Its frame was dark wood, carved with intricate floral designs worn with age. The glass was a little cloudy, slightly tinted gray at the edges. At first I thought it was charming. A unique vintage piece that fit the style of the old apartment. Maybe the last tenant just didn't want to bother moving it. The property manager had only told me the place was vacated in a hurry. No details, no explanation. I decided to keep the mirror. Told myself it added character to the room. For the first few weeks, I settled into a routine. Unpacked, arranged my things, worked my usual shifts. But even then, something about the apartment didn't feel quite right. The apartment was quiet, with thick walls that muffled nearly all sound from the neighbors. The corridors of the building were dimly lit, with lights that flickered unpredictably, casting long, eerie shadows. The floors creaked underfoot, and the old pipes groaned whenever water was used. If I had to describe the atmosphere in one word, it would be heavy, oppressive in a way I couldn't quite explain. At night, once I turned off the lights, the apartment would fall into a strange, dense silence. The only sounds were the soft hum of the refrigerator or the occasional drip from the bathroom faucet. It was during those quiet hours that I began to notice something unusual about the mirror. Whenever I walked past the bedroom door in the dark, I would catch a glimpse of what looked like a shape in the mirror. It was never clear, more of a shadow or suggestion than a solid figure, but it was enough to send chills down my spine. My scalp would tingle and my heart would start to race. I kept telling myself it was just my imagination, just my tired eyes playing tricks in the dark. But the feeling didn't go away. Night after night, I felt the same tightness in my chest whenever I passed that door. Sometimes, it even seemed like the shape moved just slightly, like it had shifted the moment before I looked. My breathing would turn shallow and cold sweat would bead along my hairline. Goosebumps would break out across my arms, and I'd rush into another room, switching on every light as quickly as I could. Maybe it was just an old mirror. Maybe the discoloration in the glass was making my mind see things. But the fear settled deep in my stomach. I began dreading the hallway at night. I started leaving the bedroom door closed at all times, especially after sunset. Still, I couldn't forget it was in there, waiting on the other side of that door. Sleep became difficult. I would jolt awake randomly, convinced that something, or someone, was watching me. My dreams turned dark and foggy, filled with flickers of the mirror and a looming presence I could never quite look at directly. I thought about getting rid of the mirror, or at least storing it somewhere out of sight. But part of me hesitated, embarrassed by the thought. It was just a mirror, that's all. But each passing day added to my anxiety. Each night, as the sky darkened, my chest would tighten, and I'd feel a familiar dread as I approached the bedroom. Sometimes, after a late shift, I'd even consider entering the apartment through the living room window, just to avoid walking past that door. It didn't make sense, but fear rarely does. I eventually told a coworker that I hadn't been sleeping well. He shrugged and said moving into an old place, especially one where the previous tenant left suddenly, could mess with your head. He asked if the property manager had told me anything about the last occupant. I remembered that they hadn't said much, just that the person moved out in a rush, leaving behind a few items, including the mirror. My coworker seemed unfazed, suggesting it was probably due to personal issues. But the idea stuck with me. What kind of trouble makes someone leave behind a heavy antique mirror? It became an obsession. At night, I avoided looking into it. If I had to enter the bedroom with the lights off, I kept my eyes fixed on the floor and only looked up after turning on the overhead light. Even then, I sometimes thought I saw something move in the reflection. A ripple, a shift, like the glass was hiding something dark just beneath the surface. My head would start to pound. My heart would race. And every time I'd force myself to look fully, only to see my own tense, frightened face staring back at me. Then one night everything changed. I had come home late, exhausted from work, too tired to keep pretending I wasn't afraid. The bedroom door was open, the light inside off. As I walked down the hall, I saw it again, that shape in the mirror. But this time it wasn't faint or unclear. It was there, standing tall and distinct against the gloom, like it had finally decided to show itself. My heart thundered in my chest. My palms went clammy. My breath caught in my throat. For a long moment I just stood there, paralyzed. Then something in me snapped. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was pure exhaustion. But I couldn't take it anymore. Without thinking, I stormed into the bedroom, not even bothering to turn on the light. My mind was screaming, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I stared directly into the mirror. And I saw it. Just for a second, a human-like figure. Twisting, rippling along the edges of the glass like it didn't belong in this world. My stomach dropped. Every hair on my body stood on end. I flipped the light switch, and just like that, it was gone. The room was empty. Just me and the old furniture. But I was shaking all over. I could taste the metallic tang of fear in my mouth.